The house became so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking from every room. I spent most of my life taking care of other people, feeding them, praying for them, holding everything together when life became hard. But somewhere along the way, after the children grew older and everybody built lives of their own, I slowly began feeling like I no longer mattered at all. My name is Dorothy Muhammad. I am 73 years old. And for nearly 46 years, I lived in that little blue house in Knoxville, Tennessee, with my husband Raymond. It wasn't a fancy home. The kitchen cabinets were old. The porch steps creaked every winter. And every summer, the Tennessee heat made the upstairs rooms impossible to cool properly. But inside those, we raised a family. 3 children, hundreds of Sunday dinners, Christmas mornings, birthday cakes, and enough memories to fill a lifetime. Back then, the house never stayed quiet for very long. Somebody was always running through the hallway. Somebody always needed something. A school project, a clean shirt, advice about heartbreak. And truthfully, I loved being needed. I think most mothers do. Because when people depend on you, your life feels anchored somehow, purposeful. Even exhaustion feels meaningful when love fills the rooms around you. Raymond used to tease me about that. One evening, years ago, I remember standing at the stove trying to cook dinner while helping our youngest daughter, Melissa, memorize Bible verses for church camp. At the same time, our oldest son, Daniel, was asking for help fixing a science project at the kitchen table. And somewhere upstairs, our middle child, Rebecca, was crying over a boy who never called her back after school days. The whole house sounded chaotic, but Raymond just stood in the kitchen doorway smiling softly. You know, he laughed, most people would call this madness. I smiled while stirring soup on the stove. No, I answered gently. This is family. Back then, I truly believed those noisy years would somehow last forever. But life changes quietly, one season at a time. Children grow older, schedules change. And eventually, the very people who once needed you for everything become people you wait beside the phone hoping to hear from. Raymond passed away 8 years ago. A stroke, sudden enough that none of us were prepared. One ordinary Thursday afternoon, he sat down in his recliner after lunch and complained about feeling tired. By evening, my entire life had changed. I still remember the silence after the funeral. It frightened me. Not because I was alone physically. People came by often during those first few weeks. Church friends brought casseroles. Neighbors checked on me. The children called regularly at first, but eventually everyone returned to their own lives. And that's when the real loneliness began. The house felt different after Raymond was gone, larger somehow, too still. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking from the living room all the way into the kitchen. At night, even the refrigerator humming sounded loud. Some evenings, I found myself turning on the television to hear another human voice inside the room. One rainy afternoon, not long after Raymond passed, I stood folding laundry in our bedroom and I suddenly realized something painful. For the first time in over 40 years, there were no more work shirts to fold besides my own clothes. That realization nearly brought me to my knees, because grief often arrives through ordinary moments. Tiny reminders that someone's presence once shaped your entire routine. Still, I tried to keep moving forward. Every Sunday morning, I still attended Grace Fellowship Baptist Church near downtown Knoxville. Same pew, same hymns. And every week, someone would gently ask, "How are you holding up, Dorothy?" I always smiled softly. "Oh, I'm all right." And maybe part of that was true, but another part of me, a quieter part, I was slowly beginning to feel invisible. At first, the children called often enough. Daniel lived in Atlanta with his wife and 2 boys. Rebecca moved to Phoenix years earlier for work. And Melissa, my youngest, lived only 2 hours away in Nashville. They all had busy lives. Careers, children, responsibilities, I understood that. At least I tried to. But little by little, the calls became shorter, less personal. Instead of conversations, they became updates. "How are you feeling, Mom? Did you take your medicine? We'll try to visit soon." Try, such a small word, but after enough time, it was sounding increasingly like never. One evening, I cooked far too much food without realizing it. Old habits, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, sweet tea is cooling on the counter, enough for 5 people easily. After sitting down alone at the kitchen table, I stared quietly at all the untouched dishes around me. And suddenly, I realized I still cooked like a woman expecting family to walk through the door any minute. That hurt more than I expected. because somewhere deep inside, part of me was still waiting emotionally for life to feel full again. That night, I carefully wrapped the leftovers in containers and placed them in the refrigerator. Then I sat alone in Raymond's old recliner near the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass outside, and quietly I whispered a prayer. Lord, please help me understand who I'm supposed to be now. That prayer stayed with me. Because after spending your whole life caring for others, it becomes difficult to know who you are when fewer people seem to need you anymore. One afternoon, while cleaning the hallway closet, I found an old crayon drawing Melissa made in elementary school. Across the top in crooked little handwriting were the words, "My mommy is the best." Below it, a stick figure drawing showed me standing beside a huge dinner table, smiling. I laughed softly through tears while holding it. Because once upon a time, my children saw me as the center of home itself, a safe place, a steady place. And now sometimes, weeks passed without anyone asking how I was really doing emotionally, not because they didn't love me. I knew they did, but adulthood changes people. Life pulls attention in too many directions at once. And somewhere along the way, older mothers quietly become background comfort rather than central presence. That realization settled slowly into my spirit during those years. Not bitterness, just sadness. The kind of sadness that arrives quietly during ordinary evenings. One Sunday after church, I stood alone beside the coffee table in the fellowship hall, watching younger families laugh together. Children running between folding chairs, grandparents hugging grandchildren. And suddenly, I missed being part of someone's daily life, not occasionally remembered, needed. That feeling followed me. The sun had already begun setting over Wilt Lane by the time I pulled into the driveway. The blue house looked peaceful beneath the golden evening light, still, waiting. And standing there beside the mailbox, I realized something I had been avoiding for a long time. I had spent most of my life freely giving love away. Meals, time, comfort, I gave and gave without keeping count. But now, in the quiet years of my life, I no longer knew if anyone truly saw the woman who had held everything together for so long. And truthfully, that realization hurt more deeply than loneliness itself. Because there is a difference between being alone and feeling like you no longer matter in the lives you help build. That night before bed, I sat quietly beside the living room lamp, reading scripture. The house remained silent around me. Then softly, through tears, I barely understood myself, I whispered, "Lord, I know my worth comes from you, but sometimes I still wish somebody needed me the way they used to." The clock ticked softly nearby. Wind moved gently through the trees outside, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet ache began growing that I could no longer ignore. Because I didn't yet realize that very soon, one Sunday dinner, and one painful conversation overheard by accident, it would finally force me to face the truth I had been trying so hard not to admit aloud. At first, I believed loneliness was simply part of growing older, a normal season of life, but I didn't yet know that one empty dining room table would soon make me question whether the family I gave everything to still would truly have room for me in their hearts at all. There's a strange thing that happens to women who spend their whole lives taking care of other people. Most of the time, nobody notices how much they are carrying until they finally grow too tired to keep carrying it. And even then, some people still only notice the things that stop getting done, not the heart that spent decades quietly holding everything together. That was my life for many years inside the blue house at the end of the room. I was the one who remembered birthdays, the one who stayed awake during fevers, the one who noticed when somebody looked sad even if they insisted they were fine. And truthfully, I didn't resent anyone. Back then, love felt natural to me. Service felt fully somehow, because that's how I was raised. My mother used to say, "Dorothy knew if God gives you people to love, then love them well while you can." I carried those words my entire life, especially after marrying Raymond. He worked long hours at the tire plant outside Knoxville for nearly 30 years. Hard work, physical work, and every evening I came home exhausted. Still, he always kissed me on the forehead before sitting down at the dinner table. That mattered to me, those small gestures, because marriage is built more from little kindnesses than grand moments. Some nights money was tight enough that I quietly skipped buying things for myself so the children could have what they needed. New shoes for Daniel, band uniforms for Rebecca, piano lessons for Melissa. I never told them those sacrifices at the time. Children shouldn't grow up carrying guilt for being cared for, so instead I smiled, cooked dinner, and trusted God to stretch what little we had. Somehow, he always did. I remember one winter especially clearly. Daniel was 14. Rebecca had braces we could barely afford, and Melissa needed glasses after struggling to see the classroom board at school. That Christmas, Raymond and I barely had enough money left to buy each other presents. One night, after the children were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table staring at unpaid bills spread across the surface. The clock above the stove read nearly midnight, and quietly I began crying, not loudly, just tired tears. The kind women cry when they feel overwhelmed, but still no morning is coming quickly. Then suddenly Raymond walked into the kitchen wearing his old flannel robe. He looked at the bills, then looked at me. Without saying much, he pulled out the chair beside mine and sat down quietly. "We'll figure it out," he whispered. I nodded slowly, but what if we can't? He smiled gently. "Dorothy, this family has survived harder seasons than this." Then softly he reached for my hand. "And besides, the children won't remember whether Christmas looked perfect." He paused. "They'll remember whether home felt safe." That sentence stayed with me for decades, because Raymond understood something deeply important. People remember how love felt far longer than they remember what was purchased with it. So I kept building safety. Every day, through meals, through prayers, through listening, especially listening. One thing my children always knew: could they come to me with anything? Heartbreak, fear, failure, no matter the hour. I remember Rebecca coming home one evening during high school after a terrible breakup. She walked through the front door, trying not to cry, but mothers noticed those things immediately. I followed her quietly upstairs and knocked softly on her bedroom door. "Sweetheart," no answer. Then finally a broken little voice whispered, "Go away," but I opened the door anyway. Rebecca sat curled beneath the blanket, crying into a pillow. I climbed beside her carefully and held her. No speeches, no advice at first, just presence. After a while, she whispered through tears, "Why do people leave when they say they love you?" That question nearly broke my heart. Because life sometimes teaches that lesson painfully. I brushed her hair gently away from her face and answered softly, "Not everyone who leaves stops loving you." She cried harder after that. And truthfully, years later, I would remember those same words as I tried to understand my own children. Sundays were always special in our home. Church in the morning, big family dinners afterward. The dining room was filled with noise and laughter. Raymond was carving roast chicken at the table, while the children argued over biscuits and sweet tea. Those moments felt ordinary back then. But looking back now, I think they were sacred, because families rarely realize they are living the good old days while they are happening. One spring afternoon, Melissa came into the kitchen while I was baking peach cobbler for the church potluck. She couldn't have been older than 9. "Mom," she asked quietly, "how do you always know what everybody needs?" I laughed softly while dusting flour from my hands. "I don't always know." "Yes, you do." She said it so confidently it made me smile. Then after thinking for a moment, I answered gently, "When you love people long enough, you start noticing small things." That became my role in the family, noticing who sounded tired, who seemed worried, who needed encouragement. I carried everyone emotionally in ways they probably never fully realized. And maybe that was all right at the time, because love often works quietly. But years passed quickly, too quickly. Children grew older, schedules became busier. And somewhere along the way, the woman who always remembered everyone else's needs slowly became someone whose own emotions disappeared into the background. Not intentionally, just gradually. One Thanksgiving years later, after all the children had grown and moved away, I spent nearly 2 full days preparing dinner before everyone arrived. Turkey in the oven, homemade pies are cooling beside the window. The whole house smelled warm and familiar again, and for a little while I felt needed, alive, the way I used to. That evening, while everyone sat laughing around the table, I remember quietly watching them more than participating. Daniel is helping his boys cut turkey. Rebecca is answering work emails between conversations. Melissa is rushing to calm a crying toddler. Everybody distracted, busy. And suddenly, I realized something painful. Even surrounded by family, I felt strangely invisible. Nobody asked if I was tired. Nobody noticed I had cooked for 2 straight days. Nobody saw the ache in my knees while carrying dishes back and forth from the kitchen. Not because they were cruel, just because people become accustomed to certain kinds of love. They begin assuming that the person providing it will always continue to do so naturally. That realization hurt quietly. Like a soft bruise inside the heart, still I kept smiling, because mothers often learn to survive disappointment silently. One evening after everyone had gone home, I sat alone beside the kitchen sink, washing dishes long after midnight. The house is finally quiet again, and standing there beneath the soft yellow light, I suddenly realized something heartbreaking. I had spent most of my life making sure everyone else felt emotionally supported, without ever asking myself who supported me. That thought stayed with me, especially after Raymond passed away, because once he was gone, there was no one left who fully noticed the weight I carried quietly every day. No one is asking, "Dorothy, are you all right?" And truthfully, I missed being cared for more than I knew how to admit aloud. One rainy Sunday afternoon, I found myself sitting alone at the dining room table after church, staring at old family photographs spread across the surface. Birthday parties, church baptisms, school graduations. So many years of giving, so much love poured into them. And for the first time, a painful question rose quietly inside me. After everything I gave, did any of it still matter now? That thought frightened me immediately. Because I knew my worth came from God, not from usefulness, not from being needed. Still, loneliness has a way of making even faithful hearts question themselves sometimes. That night before bed, I opened my Bible beside the living room lamp and read softly from Galatians. "Let us not grow weary in doing good." I whispered those words aloud several times, trying to let them settle into the tired places inside my spirit. And quietly I prayed, "Lord, help me believe my life still has meaning, even in the quiet seasons." The house remained still around me after that. Only the ticking clock, only the wind outside is moving through the trees. And somewhere deep inside, the loneliness I had ignored for years began growing harder to hide. Because I didn't yet realize that very soon, one Sunday dinner invitation, and one heartbreaking moment beside the telephone, it would finally force me to confront how forgotten I had truly become inside the family I spent my whole life building together. For years, I told myself love meant giving without expecting anything back, and maybe that's true, but I didn't yet realize that somewhere along the way, the woman who held everyone together had quietly become the person nobody thought to hold anymore. At first, I barely noticed the change. That's the difficult thing about emotional distance. It rarely arrives all at once. It happens slowly, one missed phone call, one shortened conversation, one postponed visit at a time. Until one day, you realize the silence inside your house has quietly become part of your life. After Raymond passed away, the children called often at first, every evening sometimes. Daniel checked on me during his drive home from work in Atlanta. Rebecca called from Phoenix during lunch breaks, and Melissa, my sweet youngest girl, would sometimes stay on the phone for nearly an hour just listening while I talked about ordinary things. The garden, church, the weather, simple things, and even though I missed Raymond terribly, those conversations helped the house feel alive again, connected, but grief fades differently for everyone. For me, the loneliness deepened over time. For my children, life kept moving forward, and truthfully, I understood that. At least I tried to. Daniel had 2 growing boys and a demanding job. Rebecca traveled constantly for work. Melissa was raising toddlers while balancing part-time nursing shifts at the hospital. They were busy, tired, pulled in too many directions. I knew all of that. Still, some evenings, after waiting all day for the phone to ring, understanding didn't make the silence hurt any less. One Thursday afternoon, I baked banana bread from Raymond's favorite recipe. The smell filled the kitchen softly, warm cinnamon, vanilla, and for a few moments, the house almost felt full again. I even smiled while wrapping extra slices into foil. Daniel loved banana bread, Melissa too. Back when the children were younger, fresh bread cooling on the counter usually meant somebody would wander into the kitchen within minutes asking for a slice. But now, the only sound inside the room was the refrigerator humming softly near the wall. I stood there quietly staring at the untouched loaf for a long moment. Then finally, I wrapped most of it up and carried it next door to my neighbor. She smiled warmly when she opened the door. "Oh, Dorothy, you always spoil me," I laughed softly. Old habits. But walking back toward my empty kitchen afterward, a painful thought crossed my mind. I no longer knew what to do with all the love and care I still carried inside me, because for most of my life, there had always been someone needing it. One evening around sunset, I sat beside the living room window, knitting while waiting for Melissa to call. She had promised earlier that week, Thursday evening for sure, Mom, so I waited. The sky outside slowly darkened over Willow Lane. Streetlights flickered softly to life. And every few minutes I glanced toward the telephone resting beside Raymond's old recliner. 7 o'clock passed, then 8. The house remained quiet. By 9:30, I finally turned off the lamp and prepared for bed. And just as I reached the hallway, the phone rang. My heart lifted instantly. "Hi, sweetheart." Melissa sounded exhausted immediately. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry." Children are crying faintly in the background. Cabinet doors are closing. The sound of a busy life continuing somewhere far away from mine. "We've had a crazy day," she explained quickly. I smiled softly even though she couldn't see me. "That's all right," and truthfully, part of me meant it. But another part of me quietly noticed something painful. She had forgotten I'd been waiting. That realization settled heavily inside my chest after we hung up. Not because she didn't love me, I knew she did, but because I was slowly becoming someone people fit into spare moments instead of someone central in their daily lives. That change is difficult for mothers, especially after spending decades making everyone else your priority. One Sunday morning after church, Pastor Bennett stopped me near the Fellowship Hall coffee table. "How are the children doing?" he asked kindly. I smiled automatically. Oh, they're all doing very well, and that was true. But while driving home afterward, I realized something quietly. I spent far more time talking about my children's lives than they spent asking about mine. That thought stayed with me, especially during the evenings. Evenings were hardest. Daytime still carried distractions, laundry, groceries, church activities, but nighttime made loneliness louder somehow. One rainy evening, I heated leftover soup and carried it into the living room on a tray. The television played softly in the background, but I wasn't really watching it. I kept glancing toward the phone, waiting, hoping, and eventually I caught myself thinking something that made tears rise instantly. Maybe they don't need me anymore. That thought frightened me, because mothers build their identities around being needed. Caretaking becomes part of who you are. So when the calls become less frequent, when nobody asks for advice anymore, when holidays become maybe this year, rather than certain, the woman begins wondering where she still belongs emotionally. One afternoon, while cleaning the hallway closet, I found an old voicemail recorder Raymond insisted on keeping years ago. Curious, I plugged it in, and suddenly voices filled the room, old messages. Daniel is calling home from college. Rebecca singing happy birthday into the machine 1 year ago. Melissa at 16 asked if I could bring her forgotten lunch to school. I laughed softly through tears listening to them. Because once upon a time, my children reached for me constantly, not out of obligation, out of closeness, out of comfort. And hearing those younger versions of their voices made the present silence hurt even more deeply. One evening, Daniel finally called after nearly 2 weeks. "Hey, Mom." His voice sounded distracted immediately, typing in the background, maybe emails, maybe work. "How are the boys?" I asked gently. "Busy." That word again, busy. Such a simple word, and yet over time, it became the explanation for almost every distance growing between us. We spoke for only a few minutes before he sighed heavily. "Sorry, Mom, I've got to jump on another call." Another call, another meeting, another thing was to pull his attention elsewhere. "That's all right, sweetheart." And after hanging up, I sat quietly staring at the silent phone in my hands. The living room suddenly felt unbearably still, because what hurt most wasn't the short conversation itself. It was realizing he no longer noticed how little we spoke anymore. That frightened me deeply. One cold November night, I accidentally set 4 plates on the dining room table instead of one while preparing dinner. The mistake startled me. I stood there quietly staring at those extra plates beneath the soft dining room light. And suddenly, tears filled my eyes before I could stop them, because part of me was still emotionally living in the years when this house stayed full, the years when my children's voices filled every room. That night, I slowly carried the extra dishes back into the cabinet, then sat alone at the table, eating in silence. And quietly, I realized loneliness had stopped feeling temporary. It had begun feeling permanent. Later that evening, I opened my Bible beside the living room lamp and tried to read the Psalms, but my mind kept drifting toward memories, toward old family dinners, birthday parties, late-night conversations after heartbreaks. And for the first time, I admitted something painful to myself. I missed being important to somebody's everyday life, not occasionally remembered, needed. That distinction matters more than younger people understand. One rainy afternoon shortly before Christmas, I finally gathered enough courage to call Rebecca unexpectedly during work hours. The phone rang several times before she answered hurriedly. "Mom, everything okay?" I immediately heard concern in her voice, as though unexpected calls now automatically meant emergencies. "Yes, sweetheart," I said softly. "I just wanted to hear your voice." There was silence for half a second. Then guilt, I could hear it instantly. "Oh, Mom, I'm sorry I haven't called more." And suddenly, I regretted calling at all, because the last thing I wanted, it was for my children to love me through obligation. So instead, I smiled gently into the phone. No, I know life gets busy. Busy again, always busy." After we hung up, I sat quietly beside the window, watching rain slide down the glass. And for the first time, I truly began questioning whether aging meant slowly disappearing from the center of everyone's life. Not through cruelty, not through lack of love, just through time, through busyness. Through people assuming there will always be another chance to reconnect later. Looking back now, I think chapter 3 was the beginning of my heart quietly breaking in ways nobody else could see. Because emotional neglect rarely looks dramatic from the outside. Most of the time, it just looks like a woman sitting alone in a quiet house, waiting beside a telephone that no longer rings the way it used to. And at the time, I still believed things would eventually improve, that family closeness would naturally return somehow. I didn't yet realize that one Sunday dinner invitation and one empty table would finally force me to confront how deeply forgotten I had begun to feel within my own family. At first, I told myself the silence didn't matter, that my children were building busy lives, but I didn't yet understand that soon one untouched dinner table and one heartbreaking conversation overheard by accident would make me question whether I still mattered to anyone at all anymore. There are certain moments in life that breaks your heart quietly. No arguments, no shouting, just silence arriving where love once lived loudly. That Sunday dinner was one of those moments for me. It began with hope, simple hope. The kind older mothers still carry, even after disappointment has visited more times than they care to admit. It had been nearly 4 months since all 3 of my children had been together in the same room. 4 months of short phone calls, canceled visits, promises of soon. And one Thursday afternoon, while folding laundry beside the television, I suddenly decided I'm bringing my family home for Sunday dinner. Not a holiday, not a birthday, just family. The way we used to do it years ago, back when Sundays meant crowded kitchens, laughter drifting through the hallway, and Raymond was carving roast chicken while the grandchildren ran through the living room. Back when the blue house at the end of Willow Lane still felt like the center of everyone's life. So I called them. Daniel answered first. "Sunday dinner," he repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, sweetheart," I smiled softly into the phone. "It's been too long since everybody's been together." There was a pause while he checked something in the background. Then finally, "I think we can make it work." Hope lifted gently inside my chest. Rebecca sounded uncertain at first. "Mom, work has been crazy lately." "I know, honey." Another pause, "but I'll try, that word again. Still, I chose hope anyway." Melissa sounded the warmest of all. "Oh, Mom, the kids would love that." And hearing excitement in her voice made something inside me feel alive again for the first time in weeks. After hanging up the phone that evening, I sat quietly at the kitchen table, smiling to myself. The house already felt different somehow, lighter, purposeful again, because love often needs something to prepare for. That Friday morning, I woke at sunrise, made coffee, opened the kitchen curtains, and began planning the menu carefully. Roast chicken, green beans with bacon, sweet potato casserole, Daniel's favorite peach cobbler. Rebecca always loved homemade rolls, and Melissa still asked for my banana pudding every single visit, even at 40 years old. That thought made me laugh softly. Some children never fully grow up. For the next 2 days, the house slowly transformed. Fresh flowers on the dining room table, clean sheets in the guest room. I even polished Raymond's old silverware set until it shone beneath the kitchen light. The whole time, memories kept rising around me. Rebecca helped me stir cake batter as a little girl. Daniel was sneaking biscuits before dinner was ready. Melissa falls asleep on the couch after church every Sunday afternoon. Back then, I never imagined those noisy years would someday become the thing I missed most. Saturday evening, I stood alone in the kitchen rolling pie crust while soft gospel music played from the radio. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled the whole house. And suddenly, for the first time in a very long while, Not because anyone said it aloud, but because mothers understand something deeply. Preparing for people is another form of loving them. That night before bed, I walked slowly through the dining room, checking everything one last time. The table looked beautiful beneath the soft chandelier light. 6 chairs were waiting quietly, and for a brief moment, the house no longer felt lonely. It felt expectant. Sunday morning arrived bright and cool. Church bells echoed softly through Knoxville while sunlight stretched across Willow Lane. I wore Raymond's favorite blue sweater to church that morning, the one he always said matched my eyes. And during the closing hymn, I caught myself smiling, because for the first time in months, I was genuinely looking forward to coming home afterward. By noon, the kitchen was alive and warm, steam rising from dishes, coffee brewing. The roast chicken is nearly finished in the oven. I kept glancing toward the clock every few minutes. Daniel said they'd arrive around 1, Melissa shortly after. Rebecca's flight landed that morning. Everything felt carefully timed. At 12:47 p.m., my phone rang. I smiled immediately while wiping my hands on a dish towel. "Hi, sweetheart." Daniel's voice sounded strained. "Mom, I'm so sorry." My stomach tightened instantly. "One of the boys woke up sick this morning." I closed my eyes briefly. "Oh no, yeah, I don't think we should risk bringing him around everybody." There it was, the first cancellation. Still, I smiled softly. I understand, and truthfully, part of me did. Children get sick, life happens. After hanging up, I stood quietly beside the kitchen counter for a moment. Then finally, I whispered to myself, "That's all right. Rebecca and Melissa are still coming." So I kept cooking, kept hoping. At 1:32 p.m., the phone rang again. Rebecca this time. Her voice already sounded apologetic before she even spoke. "Mom, my return flight got moved unexpectedly." I gripped the edge of the counter gently. "What does that mean?" "I may not make it until tonight." Tonight, long after dinner would already be over. Silence settled between us briefly. Then softly she added, "I'm really sorry." I swallowed carefully. "It's okay, honey." But after the call ended, something inside my chest began aching in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. Still, Melissa was coming. I held on to that thought tightly. By 3 o'clock, the food sat fully prepared on the counters. The rolls are cooling beneath towels. The banana pudding is waiting in the refrigerator, and the dining room table still untouched. The house had grown strangely quiet again. At 3:18 p.m., my phone buzzed once more. This time, before answering, I already knew. "Mom," Melissa whispered. "One of the children is crying loudly in the background. We've had a terrible morning." I lowered myself slowly into a kitchen chair. "Is everything all right? Tyler's fever just got worse, and honestly, I don't think we can make the drive now." There it was, the final cancellation. The final silence. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Not because I was angry, because heartbreak sometimes leaves people wordless. Finally, I smiled gently into the phone. "Take care of the babies first." "You're sure?" "Yes, sweetheart." And after we hung up, the whole house became unbearably still. I sat alone in the kitchen staring at the untouched dishes around me. Steam still rising softly from food nobody would eat. The clock was ticking loudly above the stove. And suddenly, the loneliness hit harder than it ever had before. Not because plans changed, but because deep down I realized nobody truly understood what this dinner had meant to me emotionally. To them, it was one event, one afternoon. To me, it was hope, connection, a chance to feel like home still mattered. I eventually carried the dishes slowly into the dining room anyway, placed everything carefully onto the table, then sat down alone beneath the chandelier light. 6 chairs, only one occupied. And there in the middle of all that beautiful, untouched food, I finally allowed myself to admit something I had avoided for years. I no longer felt central in my children's lives, not truly. Loved, yes, but needed, important. I wasn't sure anymore. That realization broke something quietly inside me, not dramatically, just deeply. I stared at Raymond's empty chair beside the table for a long moment, and suddenly I missed him terribly. Because if he were still here, he would have noticed immediately how much this hurt me. He would have sat beside me quietly and whispered, "They still love you, Dorothy." And maybe that was true. But love without presence eventually begins to feel lonely, too. That evening, instead of eating dinner properly, I packed the leftovers into containers and silently stacked them in the refrigerator. Enough food for 10 people. And somehow that made the emptiness feel even larger. Later that night, I sat alone beside the living room lamp, holding my Bible in trembling hands. Rain tapped tapped softly against the windows outside. And quietly, for the first time in my life, I whispered something aloud that frightened me deeply. After everything I gave them, why do I feel so easy to leave behind now? Tears slipped slowly down my face after that. Not bitter tears, just tired ones. The kind older woman cries when they've spent too many years pretending they don't need comfort too. The clock ticked softly nearby. The house remained silent around me. And somewhere deep inside, a painful truth had finally begun surfacing. I had spent so long making everyone else feel emotionally cared for that nobody noticed I was quietly starving for the same tenderness myself. That empty Sunday dinner table broke my heart more than I admitted to anyone. But I didn't yet know that very soon, one accidental conversation overheard over the telephone would finally make me realize my children no longer saw me as the heart of the family anymore, but as something much heavier. There are certain sadnesses that older mothers become very skilled at hiding, not because they are dishonest, but because after a certain age, you begin to realize people feel more comfortable with your strength than with your honesty. So you learn to smile gently. You learn to say, "Oh, I'm doing just fine," even when your heart has spent the entire afternoon aching from loneliness. That was the season I slowly entered after the Sunday dinner that no one came to. The blue house at the end of Willow Lane looked the same from the outside. The porch swing still moved softly in the wind. The curtains still glowed warmly at night. And every Sunday morning, I still dressed carefully for church the way I always had. But inside, something had quietly changed. After that empty dinner table, I stopped expecting people to show up emotionally the way they once did. Not because I stopped loving my children. I could never do that. I stopped allowing myself to hope so loudly. There is a difference. One Monday morning, I stood in the wrapping leftover peach cobbler into containers. Enough food remained from Sunday dinner to feed several families. And while sealing one plastic lid carefully, I suddenly realized something painful. I had spent 2 full days preparing a meal nobody ever truly planned to prioritize. That thought hurt more than I admitted aloud. Still, when Melissa called later that evening to apologize again, I smiled softly into the phone. "Oh, sweetheart, these things happen, and maybe they do. But older mothers often hide how deeply small disappointments actually cut over time. Because one cancellation may be understandable, but years of emotional distance slowly become grief." One rainy afternoon later that week, I went grocery shopping alone. The supermarket near Kingston Pike was crowded with young families preparing for Thanksgiving. Children begging for cereal, couples arguing softly over shopping lists, ordinary things. But walking those aisles alone, I suddenly missed being part of someone's everyday routine. Not occasionally remembered, included, needed. At one point, I reached automatically for the giant family-sized turkey I used to buy every November. Then stopped myself quietly. My hands rested on the shopping cart for several seconds because there was no reason anymore. No crowded dining room coming. No grandchildren running through the house, just me. I quietly placed the large turkey back into the freezer section and reached instead for the smallest one they had. And somehow, that tiny moment nearly broke my heart right there in the grocery store. Because grief often hides itself inside ordinary adjustments. Things nobody else notices. Smaller grocery lists, unused guest rooms, cooking less food because fewer people come home now. That evening I unpacked groceries slowly while soft gospel music played through the kitchen radio. The house smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon candles. And suddenly, I remembered something Raymond once told me years ago. We had been sitting on the porch swing late one summer evening after the children finally went to bed. I remember feeling exhausted that night. Deep kind of exhaustion young mothers carry silently as they try to hold everybody together. Raymond smiled gently and said, "You take care of everybody so naturally, I worry nobody remembers to take care of you." Back then, I laughed the comment away, but standing alone in my kitchen all those years later, I realized he had seen my future loneliness before I ever did. Older mothers become experts at hiding pain, especially emotional pain. We hide it during phone calls. "How are you doing, Mom?" "Oh, I'm all right." We hide it at church, smiling while other families sit together in crowded pews. We hide it during holidays, pretending the empty chairs at the table don't ache quite so much. And eventually, the pretending becomes a habit. One Sunday afternoon after service, Evelyn and invited me to lunch at a small diner near downtown Knoxville. We sat beside the window drinking coffee while rain tapped softly against the glass. At one point, she studied me quietly over her cup. "You seem sad lately," I smiled automatically. "Oh, I'm just tired," but Evelyn kept looking at me carefully. Then softly she asked, "Dorothy, when was the last time somebody really asked how your heart was doing?" That question caught me completely off guard, because suddenly I realized nobody had asked me that in a very long time, not deeply, not honestly. Most people ask older women practical questions. Did you take your medicine? How's your blood pressure? Do you need groceries? But very few people ask, are you lonely? Are you hurting emotionally? Do you still feel important to someone? I lowered my eyes toward my coffee cup quietly, and for a moment I nearly told the truth. Nearly admitted how empty the house felt some nights, how painful the silence had become. But instead, I smiled gently again. I'm all right, because after a while, older mothers begin protecting their children from emotional discomfort the same way they once protected them from nightmares, even if it means suffering in silence themselves. That night, I sat alone in the living room, flipping through old photo albums while the wind rattled softly against the windows. There we were, Christmas mornings, church picnics, beach vacations, pictures from the years when everybody still gathered close, naturally. And looking at those photographs, I noticed something heartbreaking. In almost every picture, I was the one behind the camera, capturing everyone else's happiness, preserving everyone else's memories, and somehow that felt symbolic of motherhood itself. So much of our love happens quietly in the background, unnoticed while it's happening, only understood fully later. One photograph slipped loose from the album and landed gently onto the carpet. Daniel, age 7, was asleep against my shoulder during the Christmas Eve service. I picked it up slowly and smiled through tears. Back then, my children reached for me instinctively, for comfort, for safety. And now I often wondered if they even realized how much I still needed emotional closeness from them too, not dependency, not rescuing, just warmth. Just presence. One evening shortly before Thanksgiving, Melissa called while I was folding laundry beside the television. "Mom, are you doing anything tomorrow night?" The question startled me slightly, because suddenly I became aware of how often my answer was no these days. "No, sweetheart. Well, Tyler has a basketball game if you'd like to come." My heart lifted instantly. Oh, I'd love that. And truthfully, I spent more time preparing for that little basketball game than I probably should admit. Picked out my sweater carefully, baked cookies for the children afterward. Because when your world becomes quieter, even small invitations begin feeling precious. The game itself lasted barely an hour, children shouting, sneakers squeaking across the gym floor, ordinary chaos. But sitting there beside Melissa while Tyler searched the bleachers, smiling after making the basket, I suddenly felt included again, part of life again. And when he waved excitedly, shouting, "Grandma. Did you see that?" My eyes filled with tears immediately. Because sometimes older hearts break over the smallest kindnesses, not because they are weak, because they have gone too long without feeling needed more. Later that evening, after returning home, I stood quietly inside the darkened kitchen, holding the empty cookie container against my chest. And softly, I whispered something aloud that I hadn't realized until that moment. I miss belonging somewhere every day. The honesty of those words settled heavily inside the room, because that was the real ache underneath everything, not attention, belonging. Older mothers learn to hide that longing carefully. We don't want to seem needy. We don't want our children to feel guilty about building lives of their own. So instead, we say things like, "Don't worry about me. I know you're busy. I'll be fine." Even while quietly praying, someone notices we're hurting anyway. One cold evening near the end of November, I sat beside the living room lamp, reading my Bible while the house remained painfully still around me. Psalm 27 rested open across my lap. "My heart says of you, seek his face." I read the verse slowly several times. Then finally, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Lord, help me not disappear emotionally while I'm still alive." Tears slid silently down my face after that prayer. Because deep down, I feared loneliness was slowly turning me invisible. Not to God, never to God, but to the people I loved most. The clock ticked softly nearby. Cars passed occasionally outside on Little Lane. And somewhere deep inside, the sadness I had spent years hiding behind smiles and politeness continued quietly growing heavier. Because I still didn't realize that very soon, one rainy afternoon inside the hallway upstairs would finally force me to confront just how fragile and alone my life had truly become. For years, I learned how to hide loneliness behind kindness, how to hide disappointment behind understanding. But I didn't yet know that one frightening fall inside my quiet blue house would soon reveal a truth I could no longer hide from myself anymore. There are certain afternoons in life when memories find you before you are emotionally ready for them. Not through grand moments, just small ordinary things, an old photograph, a familiar smell, a forgotten box tucked quietly into the back of a closet. That's how it happened to me. A rainy Thursday afternoon in Knoxville, the kind of soft, steady rain that makes the whole world feel slower somehow. I had spent most of the morning cleaning the house, not because the company was coming. Truthfully, nobody had visited in weeks, but older women often clean when their hearts feel unsettled. Something about folding towels or dusting shelves gives lonely thoughts somewhere to rest for a little while. The blue house at the end of Willow Lane felt especially quiet that day. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The grandfather clock near the staircase echoed through the hallway louder than usual. And somewhere between organizing kitchen drawers and changing bed linens, I found myself standing in front of the hall closet. The same closet where I had stored decades of family things, Christmas wrapping paper, church cookbooks, old school projects the children made years ago. For a moment, I almost closed the door again, but something inside me whispered, "Keep looking," so I did. I climbed carefully onto the small step stool Raymond used to fuss at me for using alone. "Dorothy, me," he'd laugh. "One of these days, you're gonna fall trying to do everything yourself." That memory made me smile sadly. Because after Raymond passed, doing everything myself became normal. I reached toward the top shelf slowly, moving old blankets aside, and then I saw it, a faded white storage box lightly covered in dust. At first, I couldn't even remember what was inside, but the moment I lifted it into my arms, something inside my chest tightened softly. Memory. I carried the box carefully into the living room and placed it on the coffee table beside the lamp. Rain still drifted gently outside. The whole house smelled faintly of lavender and old books. For several long seconds, I stared at the lid without opening it, almost afraid of what waiting memories might do to my heart. Then finally, I lifted the top. Inside were birthday cards, dozens of them, some handmade, some store-bought, tiny little crayon drawings mixed between faded envelopes and folded construction paper. And suddenly, the room no longer felt quiet. It felt full of ghosts, beautiful ghosts. I picked up the very first card carefully, Daniel's handwriting, crooked little letters across the front. "Happy birthday, Mommy." I laughed softly through tears immediately, because he couldn't have been older than 6 when he made it. Inside, he had drawn a picture of our family standing outside the blue house. Stick figures holding hands beneath a giant yellow sun, and at the very bottom, written carefully in red crayon, were the words, "My mommy makes everything better." I covered my mouth quietly after reading that. Because once upon a time, my children saw me as safety itself. Not perfect, not glamorous, just dependable. The person who fixed things emotionally when life became frightening. I picked up another card, Rebecca's. Pink glitter still clinging faintly to the paper after all these years. "Thank you for always listening to me," it read. And suddenly, I remembered late nights sitting on Rebecca's bedroom floor while she cried over high school heartbreaks. Conversations beside the kitchen sink after difficult college semesters. The way she used to call me first whenever life overwhelmed her. Back then, my voice still felt necessary in her world. That realization hurt more deeply than I expected. One by one, I opened the cards slowly. Melissa's homemade Mother's Day drawings, birthday notes from church youth camps, little folded papers saying things like, "You're the best cook ever. Thank you for helping with my homework. I love when you pray with me." Simple things, children's words, but sitting there alone in the quiet living room, they felt sacred somehow. Because every single card reminded me of a time when my love had been visible, needed, felt, and suddenly I realized how long it had been since anyone said things like that aloud anymore. Not because my children stopped loving me, but because adulthood changes the language of relationships. People grow busy, distracted, and over time, they quietly stop expressing tenderness they assume should already be understood. I sat there for nearly an hour surrounded by old cards and memories. Rain was sliding softly down the windows beside me, and for the first time in many months, I cried openly, not dramatic crying, just the deep, quiet tears of a woman grieving the passing of closeness itself. One card, in particular, nearly broke me completely. It was from Melissa during elementary school. Construction paper folded unevenly down the middle. Across the front, she had written carefully, "When I grow up, I want to be just like my mom." I pressed that card gently against my chest, because life changes people in ways children never expect. When we are young, we believe parents will naturally remain at the center of our lives, but adulthood slowly rearranges priorities, and sometimes, without meaning to, people stop nurturing the very relationships that once nurtured them. The room grew darker as afternoon rain clouds thickened outside. Still, I kept reading, card after card, memory after memory. Then suddenly, I found something else hidden beneath the stack, a small folded church bulletin. Inside, Raymond's handwriting. "Don't forget how much this family needs you." The tears came harder after that, because Raymond saw me, truly saw me, the exhaustion, the sacrifice, the invisible emotional labor women carry quietly every day. And suddenly, I missed being seen like that more than words could explain. I lowered myself deeper into the couch cushions and looked around the quiet living room slowly. The photographs, the empty recliner, the ticking clock, and softly through tears I whispered aloud, did I matter only when everybody needed something from me? The question frightened me the moment it left my mouth. Because deep down I knew my worth came from God, not usefulness, not constant attention. Still, loneliness has a way of making older hearts question things they never doubted before, especially after years of emotional silence. One memory returned to me strongly then, a night years earlier, when Daniel had a terrible fever as a little boy. I stayed awake beside his bed until sunrise, cooling his forehead with washcloths while Raymond slept briefly before work. Around 4 in the morning, Daniel opened his sleepy little eyes and whispered, "Always stay." That sentence echoed painfully inside me now, because I had stayed through sickness, through heartbreak, through every difficult season my children faced. And somehow, in the quieter years of my own life, I no longer knew who would stay emotionally by my side. The rain outside eventually softened into drizzle. Evening shadows stretched slowly across the carpet. And still, I sat surrounded by birthday cards and memories from a lifetime of motherhood, a lifetime of pouring love outward every single day. Finally, I gathered the cards carefully back into the box, slowly, tenderly, like fragile pieces of my heart. But before closing the lid, I reached for a blank note card sitting nearby. And quietly, I wrote something I wasn't ready to say aloud to anyone else yet. I miss feeling important to the people I gave my life to. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into the box beneath the old birthday cards. Then I closed the lid softly. The room remained still around me afterward. Only the ticking clock, only distant thunder outside, and somewhere deep inside, I realized something painful. The hardest part of growing older wasn't wrinkles or aching knees or gray hair. It was slowly feeling emotionally forgotten, while still loving people with your whole heart anyway. That night before bed, I sat beside the living room lamp, reading Psalm 71 softly aloud. "Do not cast me away when I am old." My voice trembled slightly while reading those words. And quietly, I whispered a prayer through tears. "Lord, please help my children remember me while I'm still here to hear their voices." The house stayed silent after that, and deep down, the loneliness I had hidden for years continued growing heavier inside me, because I didn't yet realize that very soon, one frightening accident inside that quiet blue house, it would finally show me just how alone my life had truly become. That rainy afternoon, I thought the box of birthday cards would bring back sweet memories, but I didn't yet know that was hidden between those old papers was the painful reminder of a woman who once meant everything to her family and was now quietly wondering if anyone still truly saw her at all. There are certain moments in life when a person suddenly realizes how alone they truly are, because nobody loves them, but because there is no one close enough anymore to notice when something is wrong. That realization came to me on a cold Tuesday morning in late November, the kind of Tennessee morning where the sky stays gray for hours and the air feels damp even inside the house. I woke earlier than usual that day. My knees were aching badly from the weather. That happened more often now. Little reminders that age slowly settles into the body, whether we welcome it or not. Still, I moved through the morning quietly like always, made coffee, opened the kitchen curtains, fed the birds outside the back window, The blue house at the end of Willett Lane felt especially still. No television, no music, just the soft ticking of the grandfather clock and rain beginning to tap lightly against the roof. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, holding my coffee mug, watching two sparrows fighting over breadcrumbs near the porch steps. And suddenly, a strange sadness settled over me for reasons I couldn't fully explain. Because mornings used to feel different. Years ago, this house woke up loudly, children rushing to school. Raymond is reading newspapers at the kitchen table. Voices, movement, life. But now some mornings passed without hearing another human voice at all. I tried not to dwell on thoughts like that. Loneliness grows heavier when you feed it too much attention. So instead, I decided to clean the upstairs hallway closet. Old habits again. Keeping busy helped quiet emotions sometimes. Around mid-morning, I carefully carried a basket of folded towels upstairs. My left knee had been bothering me for weeks already, but I ignored it. Women from my generation were taught to keep going. No complaints, don't slow down, just keep moving. I reached the top stairs slowly and started toward the hallway linen closet. And then everything changed in 1 second. My slipper caught slightly on the edge of the hallway runner, just enough. I remember the sudden feeling of losing balance. The basket is slipping from my hands, and then the terrifying sound of my own body hitting the hardwood floor. Hard, pain exploded through my hip instantly, sharp enough to steal the air from my lungs. For several seconds, I couldn't even breathe properly. I lay there stunned beside the hallway wall while towels scattered around me. The house remained completely silent. No footsteps running toward me, no voice calling my name. Only rain outside and my own uneven breathing. I tried sitting up immediately, but pain shot through my side so fiercely, I cried out loud without meaning to. And hearing my own voice echo through the empty hallway nearly broke my heart. Because there was nobody there to hear it, nobody. I stayed on the floor for a long time. I'm not even sure exactly how long. 10 minutes maybe longer. Time feels strange when fear enters a room. Eventually, I managed to pull myself slowly against the wall. My hands trembled badly, not only from pain, from realization. At 73 years old, I had just fallen inside my own home, and nobody would have known if I stayed there all day. That thought frightened me more than the injury itself. I reached for the hallway table and slowly pulled myself upright inch by inch. Every movement hurt. My hip burned terribly. My shoulder throbbed, but somehow I made it downstairs. One careful step at a time. When I finally reached the kitchen, I lowered myself into a chair and sat there breathing hard. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. The coffee I poured earlier had gone cold beside the sink. And suddenly the loneliness inside that house felt unbearable. Not dramatic, just deeply real. Because for the first time, I fully understood how invisible my daily life had become. One accident, one emergency. And nobody would know until much later. I stared at the telephone on the counter for a very long time that morning. Part of me wanted to call Daniel immediately, or Melissa, to hear a familiar voice, to stop feeling so alone. But another part of me, the larger part, could already imagine their reactions. Mom, you shouldn't be living alone. Maybe it's time to think about assisted living. You need someone checking on you more often. And truthfully, I wasn't ready to become a problem people needed to solve. That's one of the hardest parts of aging, not the physical weakness, the fear of becoming a burden to the people you love. So instead, I chose silence again. I took 2 pain pills, wrapped an ice pack in a dish towel, and told myself I was fine, even though deep down I knew I wasn't. That evening, Melissa called while I sat carefully in Raymond's recliner, trying not to move too much. Hi, Mom. Her voice sounded cheerful. Children laughing somewhere in the background. How was your day? I hesitated, only briefly, long enough for truth to almost escape. Then softly I smiled into the phone. Oh, quiet mostly, quiet mostly. What a small sentence to hide so much pain inside. We talked for maybe 15 minutes. She told me about the children's school fundraiser. Her husband is working overtime, ordinary life. And several times during that conversation, I almost told her, almost said, Melissa, I fell today. But every time the words rose into my throat, I swallowed them back down. Mothers spend their whole lives protecting their children from worry, even grown children, especially grown children. After we hung up, I sat alone in the darkened living room listening to the clock tick softly beside the staircase. And for the first time in many years, fear settled into my spirit. Not fear of dying, fear of disappearing quietly. fear that one day something serious might happen inside this house, and my absence would only be noticed later when somebody finally remembered to call. That realization wounded me deeply. The following days became harder physically. Walking hurts, sleeping hurts. Still, I told nobody. At church that Sunday, Evelyn noticed immediately. "Dorothy, you're limping." I laughed softly, trying to dismiss it. "Oh, just overdid things around the house." But Evelyn studied me carefully, then quietly asked, "Did you fall?" The question startled me enough that tears nearly rose instantly. Because sometimes, the moment someone finally notices your pain, you realize how exhausted you are from carrying it alone. Still, I nodded lightly. A little tumble, nothing serious. Her face tightened with concern. "Did you call the children?" I looked down immediately. "No, Dorothy." I shook my head softly before she could continue. "They already have enough on their plates." The church hallway remained quiet around us for a moment. Then Evelyn whispered gently, "One day you're gonna have to let people love you back." Those words stayed with me all week, because deep down, I wasn't sure my children even realized how much I still needed their emotional closeness. Not caretaking, not rescuing, just presence, just feeling remembered. One rainy evening several nights later, I stood slowly beside the bathroom mirror, examining the dark bruises along my hip and shoulder. Purple is fading into yellow now, visible proof of something nobody in my family even knew had happened. And suddenly, a terrible thought crossed my mind. What else about my life had become invisible to them? My loneliness, my fear. My sadness, had I hidden everything so carefully that nobody realized how fragile my world had quietly become? That realization nearly broke me, because somewhere along the way, I had become so determined not to burden my children, I also stopped allowing them to truly see me honestly anymore. That night before bed, I sat beside the living room lamp, reading Psalm 46 softly through tired eyes. "God is our refuge and strength." My voice trembled slightly as I read the words aloud. Then quietly, through tears I could no longer hold back, I whispered, "Lord, I don't want to spend the rest of my life feeling forgotten inside my own family." The rain outside softened gradually. The house remained still around me. And somewhere deep inside, something painful had begun shifting. Because after the fall, I could no longer pretend loneliness was simply sadness. Now it felt dangerous too. And at the time, I still believed things between my children and me could somehow improve naturally. I didn't yet realize that very soon, one accidental conversation overheard through a speakerphone, it would finally shatter what little emotional strength I still had left. After the fall, I told myself that keeping quiet was protecting my children from some heartbreak does not arrive loudly. There are no slammed doors, no cruel arguments. Sometimes the deepest wounds come quietly, through words people never intended for you to hear. That was the kind of heartbreak that found me one cold December evening inside the blue house at the end of Willow Lane. The Christmas lights were already hanging across the front porch by then. Soft white lights. Raymond used to insist on untangling himself every year, even though he always complained about it halfway through. I had decorated early that winter, not because I felt especially joyful. Truthfully, I think I was trying to make the house feel less lonely. The tree stood glowing softly near the living room window. Nativity figures rested carefully across the fireplace mantel. And every evening, Christmas hymns drifted quietly through the rooms while darkness settled over Knoxville. But even with all the decorations, the house still felt emotionally empty somehow, especially after the fall. My hip still ached most mornings. The bruises had faded mostly, but something deeper inside me remained shaken. Because once a person realizes how fragile their life has quietly become, it becomes difficult to ignore it. That Thursday evening, I was sitting in the kitchen peeling potatoes for dinner when my phone rang. "Melissa," I smiled softly before answering. "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice sounded distracted immediately. "Hi, Mom." "Hold on one second." I heard movement. Cabinet doors are closing. Children are arguing somewhere in the background. Then suddenly, the phone shifted strangely. And before I could speak again, I realized she had accidentally placed me on speakerphone without realizing the line was still connected. At first, I almost announced myself, but then I heard Daniel's voice in the background. "Did you talk to Mom about Christmas yet?" Silence followed briefly. Melissa sighed heavily. "Not yet." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten softly. Rebecca's voice joined next. "I'm just saying somebody eventually has to talk to her." The potato peeler slipped slightly in my hand. I sat very still at the kitchen table listening. Not intentionally, not at first, but suddenly, something deep inside me already knew these were words I wasn't prepared to hear. Melissa lowered her voice. "She's been so emotional lately." A long pause, then Daniel answered quietly, "Well, she's lonely." Lonely. Hearing my sadness summarized hurt me more than I expected, but the next sentence hurt even worse. "I just worry she's becoming too dependent on us emotionally." The room around me suddenly felt cold, completely cold. I stared silently at the half-peeled potato resting in my hands, dependent. The word echoed painfully through my chest. Rebecca sighed softly. "It's hard because every conversation turns into guilt somehow." Guilt. I covered my mouth slowly. Because suddenly, every unanswered phone call, every canceled visit, every moment of loneliness I tried so carefully to hide now, it sounded like emotional pressure in their eyes. "Not love, pressure," Melissa spoke again quietly. "She's alone all the time now." Another pause, then softly, "I think she expects us to fill that space." The words landed like stones inside my heart. Because never, not once, had I wanted my children to feel responsible for my happiness. I only wanted closeness, connection, the same warmth we once shared naturally before life pulled everyone so far apart. But sitting there in that kitchen, listening silently while Christmas lights glowed softly in the next room, I realized something devastating. My children no longer saw my loneliness as sadness. They saw it as a burden. Daniel's voice returned. "Maybe it's time we start talking about assisted living." The potato rolled quietly from my hands onto the kitchen floor. I barely noticed. Assisted living. The phrase hit harder than the fall ever had. Not because I feared growing older, but because suddenly I no longer felt like their mother. I felt like a problem they were trying to manage carefully. Rebecca spoke softly. "I just don't think any of us can emotionally handle being her entire support system." That sentence broke something inside me completely, because all at once, 40 years of motherhood flashed through my mind. Staying awake beside fevers, holding crying children through heartbreaks, praying over them during difficult seasons. I had carried everyone emotionally for decades without hesitation. And now the simple desire to feel remembered sounded overwhelming to them. I closed my eyes tightly, trying not to cry aloud. The kitchen remained painfully still around me, only distant voices through the phone. Only the ticking clock above the stove. Then finally Melissa noticed the silence. "Mom," my breathing caught slightly. "Mom, are you there?" I swallowed carefully and forced my voice steady. "Yes, sweetheart." Silence exploded instantly on the other end, horrified silence. "Oh my gosh," Melissa whispered. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Daniel finally said softly, "Mom, how long were you listening?" "Long enough." Long enough to understand everything. I looked slowly around the quiet kitchen. The Christmas cards are taped beside the refrigerator, the untouched dinner ingredients, the empty chair across from me where Raymond used to sit. And suddenly I felt older than I ever had before. Not physically, emotionally. "I should probably let you all go," I whispered gently. "Mom, wait," but I couldn't bear another word, not then. I ended the call quietly and sat motionless at the kitchen table. The silence afterward felt unbearable, not angry silence, shattered silence, because the hardest part wasn't hearing they felt overwhelmed. The hardest part, I realized they had discussed my loneliness like a family obligation instead of emotional pain. Tears slid silently down my face, one after another, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt unwanted. Not unloved, unwanted. There is a difference, a painful difference older people understand deeply. I eventually stood slowly and walked into the living room. The Christmas tree glowed softly in the darkness, beautiful, quiet. And suddenly, the entire house felt like a place people visited out of duty now, rather than as a place they belonged. I lowered myself carefully into Raymond's recliner and stared at the nativity scene near the fireplace. Mary, Joseph. Baby Jesus is resting peacefully beneath soft yellow light, and quietly through tears, I whispered something aloud that I had never admitted before. "Lord, have I become too much for my own children?" The question broke my heart the moment I spoke it. Because mothers spend their whole lives trying not to become burdens, trying to remain strong, useful, easy to love. And somewhere along the way, I had started believing my value depended on how little emotional space I occupied in other people's lives. That realization wounded me deeply. The phone rang 3 more times that evening. I never answered, not because I wanted punishment. I couldn't survive pretending everything felt normal anymore. That night, I walked slowly into the hallway closet and pulled down the old white memory box filled with birthday cards, the same box from the rainy afternoon weeks earlier. I sat on the floor beside the bed, rereading the children's old handwritten notes. "You always make me feel safe. You're the best mom ever." And suddenly, the contrast between those childhood words and the conversation I overheard became unbearable. What changed? When did comfort become responsibility? When did needing emotional closeness become too much? I pressed one old birthday card against my chest and cried quietly until my shoulders shook. Not bitter tears, just grief. The grief of a woman realizing the family she gave her whole life to no longer truly understood her heart anymore. Much later that night, after the house fell completely silent, I sat beside the living room lamp with a blank sheet of paper resting in front of me. The clock read nearly midnight. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and for the first time I began writing honestly, not because I wanted to accuse anyone, but because pain is carried silently for too long, it eventually needs somewhere to go. At the top of the page, through trembling hands, I slowly wrote, "After everything I gave, I never imagined I would one day feel so emotionally invisible." Then quietly, I began to cry again. Because deep down, I already knew this letter would contain truths my children had never fully seen before. That phone conversation shattered something inside me that I could never completely repair. But I didn't yet know that was the letter I started writing that night would soon force my children to finally see the quiet loneliness their mother had been hiding behind kindness for years. Some nights a person becomes too emotionally tired to keep pretending they are all right. Not angry, not dramatic, just exhausted from carrying sadness quietly for too long. That was the kind of night it became for me after the phone call. The blue house at the end of Willow Lane had never felt so silent before, not even after Raymond died, because grief from death is one kind of pain. But feeling emotionally unwanted by people still alive, that wounds the heart differently. The Christmas tree still glowed softly in the living room corner. Colored lights reflected faintly across the windows. And somewhere outside, cold December rain drifted steadily through Knoxville. But inside that house, everything felt unbearably still. I sat alone at the kitchen table for a very long time after overhearing my children's conversation. The peeled potatoes were still resting untouched beside the cutting board. One had rolled onto the floor earlier and remained there. I didn't have the strength to pick it up, because suddenly, even ordinary tasks felt heavy. My chest hurt. Not physically, emotionally, I kept hearing the words over and over inside my mind. Emotionally dependent, too much, assisted living. And no matter how hard I tried, I could not stop wondering when my loneliness had quietly become something my children discussed like a family problem. That realization broke something deep inside me, not because they meant to hurt me. I knew they loved me in their own way, but love without understanding can still leave bruises on the heart. Around 10 o'clock, I finally stood slowly and walked into the living room. The floor creaked softly beneath my steps. I stopped beside Raymond's old recliner and touched the worn armrest gently. For years, this house had held everybody's pain. Children crying after heartbreak, financial worries, funeral grief. And somehow, I always found words to comfort everyone else. But standing there that night, I realized I no longer knew how to comfort myself. That frightened me. I lowered myself carefully onto the couch beside the lamp and stared at the nativity scene near the fireplace. Baby Jesus is resting peacefully in the manger, Mary's gentle face. Joseph was standing watchfully nearby, and quietly a thought rose inside my spirit. Even Jesus understood what it meant to feel unseen sometimes. That thought softened me a little, because loneliness feels less frightening when faith sits beside it. Still, the ache inside me remained. Finally, I reached for the notebook resting beneath the coffee table. An old spiral notebook I mostly used for grocery lists and church reminders. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, not from age, from emotion, because deep down I already knew this would not simply be journaling. This would be the truth, the kind I had spent years swallowing quietly. I stared at the blank page for several moments before writing anything at all. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway. Rain tapped softly against the roof. And after one long, shaky breath, I finally began. Dear Daniel, Rebecca, and Melissa, even writing their names made tears rise instantly. I paused to wipe my eyes carefully, then continued. I I don't think I ever taught you how lonely motherhood can become after everyone grows up and leaves. The words came slowly at first, carefully, but once my heart finally opened, the sentences began pouring out faster than I expected. I know all of you have busy lives. I know you love me, and I never wanted my sadness to feel like pressure. I stopped briefly after writing that because it mattered deeply to me. I never wanted guilt, only closeness, only tenderness, only small reminders that I still mattered emotionally somewhere in the lives I helped build. Outside, the wind rattled softly against the windows while I continued writing. I spent most of my life making sure none of you ever felt alone. The sentence blurred beneath tears immediately because it was true. I remembered fevers, school fears, nights sitting awake beside crying children. And suddenly, the weight of all those years settled heavily across my chest. Not regret, never regret. I would have loved my children the same way all over again. But somewhere along the way, I forgot mothers need comfort too sometimes. I kept writing, page after page, honest things, painful things. I know aging scares people. I know watching parents grow older feels complicated. But please understand, older people still need emotional warmth too. I paused again after that sentence. The room had grown completely quiet now, except for the ticking clock. And for the first time in many years, I allowed myself to fully admit something. I wasn't only lonely, I was grieving invisibility. Grieving the slow feeling of becoming emotionally unnecessary to the people I loved most. That truth nearly undid me. I leaned back against the couch cushions and covered my face for several moments. Then softly, through tears, I whispered, "Lord, help me write this with love instead of bitterness." Because bitterness was never what I wanted. I only wanted my children to understand my heart before it was too late. After a while, I continued writing. When you were little, you needed me for everything. Now you barely realize when days pass without calling. The honesty of that sentence hurt terribly. Still, I left it there. Because truth spoken gently is still true. One memory returned strongly while writing. Daniel at age 10, standing beside my bed during a thunderstorm. "Mom, can I sleep in here tonight?" I smiled sadly, remembering it. Back then, my presence calmed my children's fear. Now, somehow, my emotional needs seemed to create stress instead. That realization wounded me more deeply than I could explain. The pages continued to fill slowly beneath the lamplight. I don't need perfection from any of you. I don't need constant attention. But sometimes I miss feeling important in your lives. I cried hard after writing that sentence. Because it carried the deepest truth of all, not attention, importance. There is a difference. Older people do not always need solving. Sometimes they need to be remembered, need warmth, need someone to notice their absence before silence stretches too long. Around midnight, I finally reached the last page. My hands ached, my eyes burned from crying, but strangely, my heart felt lighter than it had in months. Just honest, toward the bottom of the final page, I wrote the words that mattered most. Please don't remember me someday and wish you had called more, visited more, listened more. Tears slipped down my cheeks slowly after that. Because deep down, I feared those words might someday become true. Then finally, I wrote the closing sentence. After everything I gave, I never needed repayment. I only hoped my love would still have a place to belong when I grew older. I stared at those words quietly for a very long time. The Christmas lights blinked softly nearby. Rain continued falling outside. And suddenly, the whole house felt emotionally exhausted with me. I folded the pages carefully once the ink dried, very carefully. Then I placed the letter inside my Bible beside Psalm 71, the psalm for old age. I had been reading the psalm almost every night lately. Afterward, I rested my hands softly over the closed Bible and whispered through tears, "Lord, if they ever read this someday, please let them hear my heart gently." The room remained still around me afterward, and for the first time in a very long while, I felt seen, not by people, by God. Because sometimes, when the world grows emotionally distant, faith becomes the quiet place where wounded hearts finally rest honestly. I turned off the living room lamp a little after 1 in the morning. The Christmas tree remained glowing softly in the darkness. Before walking upstairs, I paused beside the staircase and looked back across the empty house one more time. This home had held an entire lifetime of love, meals, prayers, sacrifice. And even now, despite the loneliness, I would still choose every moment of motherhood all over again. because love given freely is never wasted. Even when people fail to recognize it, they can still feel it. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in weeks, not because the pain disappeared, but because silence had finally become words. And words, sometimes, it saves hearts from breaking completely on their own. Writing the letter finally released years of quiet sadness from my heart, but I didn't yet know that very soon my children would read those pages through tears and finally realize their mother had not been asking to be rescued all along. She had only been asking not to be forgotten. It is not to be forgotten while they are still here to hear your voice. There are certain truths in life that people only fully understand after they nearly lose something precious. Sometimes, it takes silence to make people hear clearly. And sometimes, it takes tears to soften hearts that have become too distracted for too long. That winter after I wrote the letter, something inside me changed quietly. Not dramatically. I stopped chasing closeness so hard. Stopped waiting beside the phone every evening. Stopped pretending my heart didn't hurt whenever holidays felt distant and rushed. Instead, I prayed more, read scripture longer in the mornings, and slowly began placing my loneliness into God's hands instead of carrying it alone every day. The blue house at the end of Willow Lane remained quiet. But somehow, the silence no longer felt angry, only tired. One cold Sunday afternoon, I sat beside the living room window, wrapped in Raymond's old knitted blanket, while soft snow drifted across Knoxville. Church bells echoed faintly in the distance, and for the first time in months, I felt calm. Not happy exactly, but peaceful. The kind of peace that arrives when the heart finally stops begging to be understood. That evening, the phone rang unexpectedly. Daniel. I almost let it go to voicemail. Not because I wanted punishment. I was emotionally exhausted. Still, after the fourth ring, I answered softly. Hello. Silence greeted me first. Then finally, my son's voice cracked quietly. Mom. Something in his tone made my chest tighten immediately. Not defensiveness. Grief. Real grief. I'm sorry. The words came out broken, heavy, and suddenly, I knew they had found the letter. My hands trembled slightly around the phone. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then softly, Daniel whispered, I didn't know you were hurting that deeply. Tears filled my eyes instantly. Not because I wanted guilt from my children, only because after so many quiet years, I finally felt emotionally seen again. In the background, I could hear Rebecca crying softly. Then Melissa's voice joined shakily. Moms, we read every word. I closed my eyes tightly. The living room blurred around me. And for the first time in a very long while, I no longer felt invisible. Daniel spoke again. We thought giving you space was helping. We thought you wanted independence. I nodded slowly, even though they couldn't see me. I did want independence. Then softly, but independence and loneliness are not the same thing. Silence followed. The kind of silence that carries truth settles deeply into people's hearts. Then Rebecca whispered through tears. We got so busy building our lives, we stopped noticing yours. That sentence nearly broke me completely. Because finally, they understood. Not the meals, not the phone calls, the emotional ache beneath it all. The ache of slowly feeling forgotten while still loving people with your whole heart anyway. Melissa cried openly then. Oh, Mom, we never meant to make you feel unimportant. And hearing that word, unimportant, made tears slide quietly down my face. Because that had been the deepest wound all along. Not abandonment, not lack of love, simply feeling emotionally unnecessary after a lifetime of giving everything. I held the phone tightly against my ear and whispered gently, I know you love me. And I truly meant it. Because love had never disappeared between us. Only attention, only tenderness, only time. The next weekend, all three of my children came home to Knoxville. Not rushed this time, not squeezed between meetings or obligations. They came home fully, the way families used to. I stood quietly at the front window, watching Daniel's car pull into the driveway first. Then Melissa's. Then Rebecca stepped out with tears already filling her eyes. And suddenly, the blue house no longer looked lonely. It looked alive again. The moment they walked through the front door, Melissa wrapped both arms around me tightly and began crying against my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Mom. I held her gently and closed my eyes. And for the first time in years, I truly felt my children emotionally present again. Not distracted, not halfway listening. Present. Daniel hugged me next, longer than he had in years. And quietly, against my hair, he whispered, You still matter more than you know. That sentence healed something inside me I didn't realize was still broken. The whole weekend felt different afterward. Slower, softer. No one is rushing to leave immediately after dinner. No phones are constantly buzzing at the table. Just family. Real family. That Saturday evening, we sat around the dining room table for hours, talking honestly. Not surface conversations. Real ones. Rebecca cried while apologizing for becoming emotionally distant. Melissa admitted she had mistaken checking in for true connection. And Daniel, my oldest boy, who always tried to carry responsibility quietly, finally, he lowered his head and whispered, I think we assumed you'd always be there waiting, no matter how long we took. The honesty of that sentence filled the room softly, because deep down, all of us knew it was true. People often treat mothers like a permanent shelter, steady, reliable, always there when life finally slows down enough to return home again. But mothers are human too. They grow lonely, tired, and sometimes they quietly break while still smiling kindly at everyone else. That night after dinner, I stood alone for a moment in the kitchen rinsing dishes while laughter drifted softly from the living room. And suddenly tears filled my eyes again, not from sadness this time, relief. Because after so many silent years, the house finally sounded like family again. Later that evening, Rebecca found me standing beside the sink and wrapped one arm gently around my shoulders. You know what hurts the most, she whispered. I looked at her softly. What? She swallowed carefully. That we almost waited too long to hear you truly. Those words stayed with me, because life moves dangerously fast sometimes. And love, if left unattended too long, it can slowly become an assumption instead of a connection. The following Sunday morning, all of us attended church together at Grace Fellowship Baptist, the same little church where Raymond and I raised our children in faith all those years ago. There in the pew together again, hearing familiar hymns rise softly through the sanctuary, I suddenly felt Raymond's absence deeply beside us. But strangely, I also felt his presence, as though somewhere beyond this life, he already knew healing had finally returned to our family. After service, Pastor Bennett smiled warmly while meeting us outside. Well, he laughed softly. Looks like the whole Holloway family came home this morning. Daniel looked at me quietly then and softly answered, "We should have come home sooner." I squeezed his hand gently, because regret can either harden people or soften them, and I could already see softness returning to my children now. Before everyone left that evening, Melissa helped me place leftovers into containers while the grandchildren played in the living room. The kitchen glowed warmly beneath the soft yellow light, and suddenly it looked exactly like the old years again for just a moment. Not perfect, not frozen in time, just alive. Before walking out the front door, Rebecca hugged me tightly and whispered, "We're gonna do better now." I smiled softly, not because I expected perfection, only effort, only intentional love. Because relationships survive through small, steady acts of attention. Phone calls returned, visits planned, listening fully when someone speaks. That is how families stay emotionally alive. After everyone finally left that night, I stood quietly on the front porch watching their cars disappear down Willow Lane. The cold evening air moved gently through the trees. And although the house would still become quiet again, the silence no longer felt hopeless. Because now my children finally understood something important. Older parents do not simply need managing. They need to be remembered, need tenderness, need to feel emotionally included in the lives they once built with their own exhausted, loving hands. That night before bed, I opened my Bible beside the living room lamp and reread Psalm 71 softly. Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, my God. Tears filled my eyes gently while reading. Then quietly I smiled, because God never had forsaken me, and now neither had my children, not truly. They had only become distracted by life, as people sometimes do. But love, real love, can still find its way back when hearts finally slow down enough to listen again. Looking back now, I think one truth matters more than anything else. Some people spend their whole lives quietly loving others, cooking meals, holding families together, praying through difficult seasons. And often the world overlooks those kinds of people because their sacrifices become familiar, expected, but familiar love is still sacred love. So if there is someone in your life tonight, an aging mother, a quiet father, a grandparent sitting beside a silent phone, please do not wait too long to remind them they still matter. Because one day, the voice you keep meaning to call later may become a silence you won't give anything to hear again. And if this story leaves anything behind in your heart, let it be this. Nobody who spent their whole life loving others should ever have to wonder if they are still loved too. Did this story touch your heart tonight? And tell me, which city are you listening from? I would truly love to meet you down in the comments. Your words, your support mean more than you know. And if this story reminded you of someone you love, or maybe even part of your own life, please leave a gentle comment below. It encourages me to keep sharing more heartfelt life stories like this with love, faith, and honesty. Thank you so much for spending this time with me here on this storytelling journey. And if you would like more peaceful, emotional stories that speak to the heart, please subscribe and become part of this family. Until next time, take care of the people you love. Hold them close while you still can. And may God bless you with peace, comfort, and gentle moments of love. I'll see you again soon with another life story told with love and respect.